Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Welcome to Policy Legislation, covering policy and human rights.
No.
I will try to be quick because I know that there's going to be a stakeout in the Security Council after the Ukraine meeting. So, okay, hi, good afternoon. So in South Africa this morning, the Secretary General participated in the BRICS Africa Outreach and BRICS Plus Dialogue sessions. In his remarks, he delivered a simple message. In a fracturing world, overwhelmed by crisis, there is no alternative to cooperation. Noting the current global climate and increasing move towards a multipolar world, he warned that we must have strong and effective multilateral institutions. This means strengthened and reformed institutions based on the UN Charter and international law. This is especially true given that the current structures are based on yesterday's world. Mr. Guterres said, this is also true of the Security Council and Bretton Woods institutions, when so many people around the world were still under the yoke of colonialism and not at the table where the decisions were made. In the absence of such reforms, the Secretary General warned, fragmentation is inevitable and the world cannot afford to have a divided global economy with diverging strategies on critical issues such as artificial intelligence and conflicting security frameworks. And in a press briefing, he reiterated this message and said that he remains very concerned about this risk of a fracturing of the global world order and said we must urgently restore trust and reinvigorate multilateralism. And the Secretary General also had a number of bilateral meetings on the margins of the BRICS summit. Turning to the Security Council this morning, the Council held a meeting on the maintenance of peace and security of Ukraine. Briefing Council members was the Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Rosemary DiCardo. She noted that today marks a year and a half since the Russian Federation launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and there is no end in sight to this war, launched in violation of the principles of the UN Charter and international law. She said that since Russia's withdrawal from the Black Sea Initiative on the 17th of July, the fighting has only escalated, and just yesterday, as a result of another Russian drone attack in the Odessa region, 13,000 tons of grain were destroyed. She reiterated that attacks targeting grain facilities may have far-reaching global consequences, and they threaten to reverse the progress made in bolstering food security over the past year. She also said that we are concerned about the possible impact on civilians of the shelling of Russian border communities and drone attacks deep inside Russia, including Moscow. She stressed that attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure, wherever they may occur, are indefensible and strictly prohibited under international law. And she also congratulated the Ukrainian people on their National Day and stressed once again that the UN's commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. And just to know that the Security Council will reconvene this afternoon for close consultations on the UN interim force in Lebanon. And it will be Khalid Kiari, the Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, Asia, and the Pacific, who will be briefing. And moving to Sudan, the UN Children's Fund reports on the impact of the conflict. It says that at least 2 million children have been forced from their homes since the hostilities erupted 4 months ago, an average of more than 700 children newly displaced every hour. That's a terrifying number. And according to UNICEF sources, all states in Sudan are reporting severe shortage and stockout of medicines and supplies, including life-saving items. In areas with high internal displacement and where health systems are stretched, such as the Blue and White Nile states, disease outbreaks, including measles, are resurfacing with reported associated deaths. In addition, it is estimated that 20.3 million people in Sudan will be food insecure between July and September this year. At least half of them are children. Since the beginning of the crisis, UNICEF has been providing health, nutrition, water and sanitation, hygiene, education and protection services to over 4 million children, mothers and families across Sudan. And the agency continues to call on all parties involved in the conflict to prioritize the safety and well-being of children. And that is it for me. Not too many notes, so please ask away. We'll start with Yvonne. Oh, I'm sorry, Kirsten. I am getting all my names today mixed up. Sorry about that.
No problem. I had a question about Mali and the drawdown there. UN officials have been saying this will be a very challenging situation to get UN troops out of there in 6 months. More complicated by the coup in Niger. Now we've got the head of the Wagner group apparently has been killed, and their presence has been acknowledged in Mali. Given all that as the background, my question is, does the Secretary General still think it will be possible to withdraw UN troops and all of the military assets from Mali by the end of the year?
Right. I think, well, obviously, just like you have said, all of these things that are happening in the region right now are making a very complex operation that is already complex, even more complex. And the time frame is quite short. As you know, they have until the end of the year. So obviously, we are looking at how these could affect operations. I think you asked specifically about the Niger coup, and we know that this could have a significant impact on the withdrawal process, in the sense that Niger is one of the routes for repatriating personnel and equipment. And obviously, when a country's borders are shut down, we can't do that. So alternate routes will probably need to be found. And this will inevitably lead to complications in the withdrawal process. Now, we don't want to speculate. We're going to wait and see. Things are still in flux. So we're looking at all the possibilities in the region for now. But that's all I have. Yes,
And
Pam.
any reaction to Prigozhin's death, and will that have any impact on UN operations in Mali or elsewhere?
No comment at this time from us on that. Hi, Pam.
Thanks, Florencia. The question I have is about the comments that the Secretary General made this morning at BRICS. He talked about having to update the UN. Does he have any UN reform agenda planned for UNGA? Thanks.
I am not specifically sure if he has any specific meetings on reform, but I think if you look at all the upcoming meetings that are happening, a lot of these things have reform strategies already in place, right? So the SDG stimulus, the Climate Solidarity Pact, and the Acceleration Agenda, all of these things are kind of inviting countries to sort of change the status quo and really start changing the way they look at climate, the way they look at their economies, the way they look at the multilateral institutions. So even if there is no specific event on reform, there are all these different tracks where he's already pushing for it. Deji.
Two questions. First, on the BRICS summit, we know that today the BRICS countries send invitations to several countries to join this bloc. Just now you mentioned the Secretary General talking about the danger of a fractured world. What does he think about this invitation? Would this prompt a more fractured world? And what does it has to do with the global South development?
I mean, I think when he talks about a fractured world, there are two things, right? One is countries finding groupings and expanding them or being a part of those groupings, which we're absolutely fine with, and he said that this is positive. Then there's the issue of the world becoming more fragmented. How is this happening? Well, we can have all these groupings and we can have different things going on, but if there is not a strong multilateral system in place, if multilateralism is, not working, if people don't have trust in multilateral institutions, this is where it starts to become, fragmented and dangerous. And he said it himself. Fragmentation can be dangerous. It could lead to, could be dangerous for the global economy. It could lead to, beacons of confrontation in the future. So I think this is why he's pushing so much for reforms and for the need to strengthen the multilateral institutions. And one of the things that he said, because you mentioned the Global South, is, and he said this today in his speech, is one of the things about reform is that these institutions were born, and a lot of them in the 1940s, 1950s, and they lacked the representation of many countries who were under colonialism. A lot of these countries in the Global South and Africa, they're not represented. So what he wants to see is a strengthening of these institutions to have this representation and this unity so they can work together. So I'll leave it at that. Do you have a follow-up?
Another question. The Chinese President Xi Jinping today said that China will soon launch a special fund of $10 billion to implement the Global Development Initiative. What comment does the Secretary General have for this announcement?
I have seen the announcement. I think really our only reaction is we welcome any support for development, and that is very much welcome. Linda.
Thank you very much. My question has to do, you said earlier that the UN is obviously very concerned about drone attacks that have been against Ukraine, but now inside Russia. Secretary DeCarlo said, of course, that there appears to be no end in sight. Do you know if the UN considers these drone attacks inside Russia, which is a very recent phenomenon, as an escalation of the war?
I mean, obviously, I think that, Undersecretary DeCarlo said it herself, since we have seen an escalation of this conflict even since Russia left the Black Sea Initiative. I think the fact that we're seeing more death and destruction in different ways with different weapons is not really a sign that this is going in the right direction. It continues, there is no end, and it is escalating for sure. Errol.
Thank you. Does the Secretary General, through his speech at the BRICS Summit, call for a new world order?
A new world order. I am not sure if I would call it a new world order. I think what he's calling for are reforms to what we already have and just a reinvigorating of some of the multilateral institutions. I'm not sure I would call it precisely by that name. Okay. Yes, please. Hi.
Hello, I'm Shiri Fitcheton from Anadolu Agency. I just have a question on the recent broil in Cyprus on the 18th of August. I did a bit of digging into the past, and from what I can see is that on different occasions, including 1996, 2003, 2004, 2012, and even 2021, the Greek Cypriot side has carried out constructions, military fortifications, and even built a university in violation of the buffer zone. So the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs basically states that some of these go through Turkish Cypriot property. And also what I have observed from my digging into the past is that the UN and the UN peacekeeping force in Cyprus has not condemned nor intervened in any of the Greek Cypriots projects. It has merely noted them in various reports that were published. And the Turkish Cypriot side says that the latest project, which was halted by the UN peacekeeping force in Cyprus, is a humanitarian one, and it's vital for access. So I would just basically like to know, how can you explain the clear difference of treatment to both sides? And isn't the UN and the UN peacekeeping force in Cyprus obliged to treat both sides equally? Thank you.
I will have to look into this because I do not have all the movements of the Cyprus peacekeeping mission. I would encourage you to contact them first, but I'll get back to you on that.
It's a great
South
pleasure
Africa,
to
a
be here
beautiful
again.
country.
It is a beautiful country, and it is a lesson for us all. My first visit to South Africa was during the transition. I came to see Nelson Mandela when I was co-chair of the African Committee of the Socialist International, and from then on I've been accompanying South Africa with a lot of interests. And you represent, in a world where unfortunately so many divisions exist, a symbol of unity in diversity that I want to underline.
SG, let's talk about the divisions. When you spoke to the leaders, you spoke about multipolar world, good, but you have to manage this well in terms of not using this transition or those changes in terms of dividing the world further. But it is what it is. It looks like the world is drifting apart.
Well, we are facing enormous challenges. We have climate change, a defining issue of our time, and we see the devastation that is already causing, and we see that it is moving out of control. We have a cost of living crisis all over the world, a dramatic increase in poverty, in hunger, and inequalities. And we have technological developments that nobody is able to control. I mean, countries and international organizations are unequipped, both legally and technically, to deal with some of the developments that we see in artificial intelligence that have many positive aspects, but also many threats to our common future. Now, with these challenges, it's dramatic that the world is so divided. And it is essential to bridge these gaps and these divisions. Now, the world is becoming multipolar, and that is a good thing. But the experience of the past shows that multipolarity is not enough. You need to have some global governance institutions, multilateral institutions, to be able to bring together the international community in addressing these challenges. Now, for that, we need to rebuild trust. And indeed, we are in a low moment of trust, and the war in Ukraine is a factor that complicates it enormously. But one reason more for us to persist, and one reason more for us to explain that if South Africa was able, after apartheid and after what has happened in the past, South Africa was able to create a united society, we must be able to create a united world to face the challenges that are now threatening our future.
You spoke about climate change. The Paris Agreement, those agreements were not honored by the developed world, particularly your industrialized nations like your G7 and moving to the G20. Why the developed North is not honoring the agreements? Because the developing South, they are looking up to the developed countries to take them on board.
Now, I said once again today, it's absolutely essential that developed countries are able to match their commitments. Commitment of $100 billion per year for developing countries, the commitment of doubling the financial support to adaptation, with systematic impacts already in place, and we need to invest in the resilience of communities and infrastructure. That's what it's called adaptation, and that requires much more financing, and there was a promise of doubling. It needs to be materialized. We managed to have a big victory in Cairo with the creation of the loss and damage fund, but now it needs to be operationalized, and we need to replenish the Green Climate Fund. So these things are the minimum that needs to be done. But then there is more. And we have asked for what we called a global climate solidarity pact. All emerging economies must come together, and developing ones supporting developing emerging economies in order to effectively being able together to reduce emissions. There was a positive step that was done with the Just Energy Transition Agreements, one in South Africa, one in Vietnam, one in Indonesia. There was a recent similar agreement in Senegal, but it's too little. We need to have a real... there are common but differentiated responsibilities according to the capacities of different countries. That's why we are asking developed countries to reduce more quickly emissions than developing countries. But everybody must do an extra effort, and there must be a strong support from the developed world to the developing world for the developing world to be able to do it.
You spoke about the Loss and Damage Fund, the agreement in Sharm el-Sheikh, and are you confident that going to the United Arab Emirates, the COP28, we are going to see the implementation thereof?
I can tell you, this must be done. And the frustration that would come out of a failure of this is such that I believe that the member states will come together on a solution.
Let's talk about the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine has affected, again, developing countries and poorer nations. You have spearheaded what is known as the Black Sea Grain Deal. Unfortunately, the Russian Federation has taken a decision not to honor or to renew the agreement. And the argument of President Vladimir Putin is that in terms of those agreements, in relation to Russia got nothing, but also the grain went to the developed countries, while the developing countries and poorer countries, Africa in particular, got a small percentage. You are in this pot. You know better in terms of reports. What is your message to the Russian Federation?
Well, first of all, a lot of things were done to facilitate the exports of Russian food and fertilizers. There are still problems that were not yet solved, but a lot of things have already been done. And we were working and we are working to solve the remaining ones. And the fact that the initiative was interrupted doesn't help us in those efforts. And so my message is, let's work together to see if this can be solved. Second, the truth is that you need to distinguish, first of all, what is for animal feed from what is for human feed. Globally, developing countries had a share slightly larger than developed countries. But in human feed, that difference is even bigger. The fact is that in these developing countries, you have, because this was done through the mechanisms that exist, you have many countries that are middle-income countries that are there. And indeed, the percentage for the least developed countries was relatively reduced, as it is in all markets for all purposes. And that is the reason why we involved the World Food Programme in this action. And the World Food Programme had meaningful support to Yemen, to Somalia, to other countries in the same situation, exactly to compensate the fact that the natural operation of the markets is not favorable to the countries with less dimension, less capacity, less resources. But there is one thing that's important to underline. When the operation took place, prices came down. And when prices come down, they come down to everybody and to all kinds of operations.
The whole world.
So the benefit was for everybody, including those that were not receiving those grains. So it is not true that the least developed countries did not beneficiate from the Black Sea Grain Initiative.
There's a criticism that this war in Ukraine exposed the weaknesses of the United Nations, including the Security Council. And this institution, when it was formed after the World War II, the intention was to maintain world peace and unite the globe. What is your response to the criticism that the UN, it is at its weakest moment?
Many things. The UN are humanitarian agencies that have not been as active as they are now and as important as they are now to rescue people everywhere. The UN is the work by our peacekeepers in very dramatic circumstances. The UN is many things. It's not only the Security Council. It has a General Assembly, it has the Human Rights Council. But it is true that the Security Council has been blocked in relation to most of the more dramatic crises that we face. And this is one of the reasons why I've said today, as I've repeated in many other occasions, we have institutions created out of the Second World War. The world has changed. So the Security Council, as the Bretton Woods institutions, reflect the world of 45. And they need to be reformed. And Africa is particularly important on this because the African countries were not, a few were. Ethiopia was there, Egypt was there. But most of the African countries were not yet free from the colonial powers. And so they were not there where these institutions were created. And the most obvious injustice in the Security Council is that there is not one single permanent member of the African continent. The good news is that I believe that for the first time this year, I saw everybody recognizing this, including the permanent 5 members, that this problem needs to be solved. It's probably be complicated, but it needs. So I think there is a growing conscience that both in relation to the Security Council and in relation to the Bretton Woods institution, we need to transform them, to adapt them to what the world is today. The power relations of today, the economy of today, which is very different from what it was in 1945.
The SG Peace and Security, just spoken about the challenges of peace and security. We have a problem on the continent, Sudan, Libya, the DRC, now Niger. Your observation, why are we back where we see so many coups on the continent?
I think that we have a situation in which terrorist groups have emerged, and they are more and more powerful. And I've been insisting on the need for the international community to recognize that it is important to have peace enforcing and counter-terrorism operations done by robust African forces, but with a mandate from the Security Council and with guaranteed funding from so-called assessed or mandatory contributions. I've been saying that this is needed. The fact is that this has not happened until now, and we see growing insecurity. And when we see growing insecurity, then you need to find scapegoats. And unfortunately, one of the scapegoats that we are witnessing is the existence of democratic institutions in themselves. And so we see this absurd thing, which is the military that should be fighting the terrorists, are not very effective in fighting the terrorists.
They want power.
They want power. And in my opinion, we need to address the root causes of this situation. And to address the root cause of this situation is to invest in robust African capacity to address its security risks, not to give this kind of pretext to those that, instead of doing their job, are trying to grab power for whatever purposes.
Finally, SG, you are going to Kenya. You are going to the G20 in India. You'll be at the G77 plus China in Cuba. And then you have the UN General Assembly. And on the margins, you have this climate summit. And, of course, the climate summit in the United Arab Emirates. All these important engagements from different regions. what will be one strong message at a time where the economy of the globe is very sluggish? You called for a compact when you were addressing the Nelson Mandela lecture during the COVID-19, but what we saw was hoarding of vaccines.
Well, I think we need to have two complementary things. One is an immediate action plan. That's why we have proposed the so-called SDG stimulus involving the injection of $500 billion in the developing countries to be able to respond to the dramatic situation they face now with debt and to the need to invest in their youth, to create jobs, and to be able to address the challenges of climate change. And other aspects that need to be done in relation to debt relief mechanisms, change of model of multilateral development banks, and the way they need to be much more effective in mobilizing private finance at reasonable developing countries. So there are a number of things that can be done immediately. And then we need to think about what are the reforms that are necessary for multilateralism to be able to provide what it needs to provide to the world. And that is why I'm so much insisting on the need to look seriously into the reforms of the Security Council, of the Bretton Woods system, and the different other international institutions, and reforming also many of the mechanisms that we have today, and increasing the capacity of both countries and multilateral organizations to be able to deal with those aspects that unfortunately we are not controlling today. One is climate, and the other is the development of certain technologies that, if not properly regulated, can become a big threat for all of us.
Thank you so much, SG.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you, Sen.
Ambassadors from Ukraine and from Albania, but I will be speaking to you in my national capacity. Today we mark the 32nd anniversary of Ukraine's independence, and I want to congratulate the ambassador, and I want to congratulate the Ukrainian people. Their courage inspires us. But what should be a celebration is marred by one man, Vladimir Putin, who for a year and a half has tried to beat the Ukrainian people into submission. But Putin has failed. He failed miserably. The Ukrainian people have bravely fought to defend their freedom and democracy and culture, and that is something that is worthy of celebrating. And they have bravely fought to defend and return Ukraine's children who've been forcibly transferred or deported to Russia, Belarus, and Russian-occupied territories. Every single member state must hold Russia accountable for its war of choice, especially because Russia's attacks on Ukraine are attacks on us all, on the UN's very charter, on the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, and on the world's food supply. From the earliest days of its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia has weaponized food. This is a deliberate part of its war strategy, and it's having a devastating impact on people facing acute food insecurity, particularly in the Middle East and Africa. When I say Russia is waging a war on the world's food supply, I mean this literally. You can see this in the pictures that we've brought here today, which show the damage Russia has done to Ukraine's ports and grain infrastructure. Time and time again, Russia has destroyed food and the means to produce it. And just this week, reports indicate Russian drones struck Ukrainian grain facilities at the Danube River port in Izmail. Last month, Russia also unilaterally withdrew from the Black Sea Grain Initiative, an initiative that was helping grain get out to the world, especially the developing world. This isn't normal. This is not the behavior of a responsible country, and the international community must continue to call out Russia for its brutality. Today, I wanted to send a clear message to President Putin. Cease your attacks on Ukraine, on Ukraine's children, and on the world's hungry. Release Paul Whelan and Evan Gershkovich, American citizens who have been wrongfully detained, and end your senseless war of aggression once and for all. The Ukrainian people will continue to stand strong, and we will continue to stand strongly behind them. Thank you very much. And I'd like to turn the floor over to the Albanian representative. I'm going to leave you for last because you should be the last to speak.
Thank you, Linda. And let me join you in congratulating Sergei, the permanent representative of Ukraine to the United Nations, and the Ukrainian people for the Independence Day. For 547 days, the entire world has been witnessing the sacrifice of a nation united to defend its territorial integrity and sovereignty, its freedom, its choice, the right to exist, brutally assaulted by its neighbor in a blatant violation of the UN Charter and international law. Since February 24, Russia has been trying to deny the existence of Ukraine, a member of the United Nations, has tried to subjugate and annihilate its people and to annex part of its territory. It has not prevailed, as you rightly mentioned, Linda, thanks to extraordinary courage and the unwavering determination of the Ukrainian people and the strong and continued support and solidarity of the international community. Ukraine is fighting for its land, for its right to decide about its future. But we must not forget that Ukraine is also fighting for the just cause and for preserving the international rules-based order. The consequences of this war go well beyond Ukraine, affecting every corner of the world. And we call on Russia to stop the weaponization of food and to resume the Black Sea Grain Initiative as soon as possible, for the sake of those hundreds of millions in need and of the most vulnerable worldwide. This is why all peace-loving nations must continue to stand in full solidarity and maintain their enduring support for Ukraine, rooted in the shared democratic values and interests, above all, respect for the UN Charter and the principles of territorial integrity and sovereignty. We must never contemplate impunity, and in this regard we reiterate the importance of full accountability for crimes and illegal actions committed by Russia in Ukraine. I'll get it. While we reiterate our firm rejection of Russia's illegal war, we welcome every serious effort for peace, but for a just peace that respects Ukraine's internationally recognized borders and is based on the UN Charter and the United Nations resolutions we have all adopted. I thank you.
Thank you, dear friends, dear Linda, dear Ferit, dear members of the press community. At the outset, I would like to thank all the friends and partners who have congratulated Ukraine on today's Independence Day, including at this Security Council meeting that has just concluded. Their support and solidarity help our fight for independence and sovereignty. There is no doubt that this fight will end with the victory of Ukraine and the entire civilized world. This will also be a victory for the principles of the UN Charter and the rules-based order. This victory will also include accountability for those responsible for the crime of aggression, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Today at the Security Council meeting, we addressed one of the most notorious Russian crimes, crimes against Ukrainian children. We heard from the briefers that Russia continues its heinous, well-planned practice of forcible transfers and deportations of Ukrainian children, their aggressive indoctrination and Russification. The Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine is about Ukraine's future, and there is no future without children. We will continue working closely to return every deported Ukrainian child and hold every Russian war criminal accountable for every war crime committed in Ukraine. Accountability is inevitable. We are grateful to the United States for today's decision to impose sanctions on those responsible for the deportations of Ukrainian children. We encourage others to do the same. And let me conclude with the words of my President from today's address on the occasion of the Independence Day. Ukrainian children in Ukrainian squares and streets will celebrate Ukrainian independence in the same way. Our grandchildren will celebrate, and their grandchildren will celebrate, together with their friends of our state, with Ukraine's allies and partners, and there will never be any more pauses in Ukrainian history. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
A few questions. Pamela Falk from CBS. For Ambassador Thomas Greenfield, the pictures you have and what you said about the Danube ports attacks on the grain was an alternative to the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Is there any plan B after that, overland or anything, to keep the prices down?
Well, you know that land routes have already been used, but they can never provide the tonnage, the capacity that was available through the Black Sea. And this attack on the Danube port just shows clearly that Russia has no intention of allowing food to get to the world's most needy.
And just to both UN Ambassador Kizlytsa, the numbers on children being taken of 20,000, and you said Russia says it can be up to 500,000 of children who have been taken from Ukrainian territory. Is there cooperation by U.S. officials or intelligence from other countries to name these children with your prosecutors so that you know what children are where?
Well, I would like to refer you to the statement by the Undersecretary General Rosemary DiCarlo, where she speaks about the lack of cooperation on the part of the Russian Federation, both in the territories that it temporarily occupies and in the Russia proper. That makes it particularly difficult to establish and to verify information. But Russia itself publicly brags and acknowledges very huge numbers, in many cases higher than the numbers that we have already verified, and we continue our cooperation broadly with everyone, both bilaterally and multilaterally, who is willing to cooperate with Ukraine to establish facts and to verify the information.
One more. Thank you. Anadi Fatuma, Al Jazeera English. This is for Ambassador Thomas Greenfield. So you mentioned, along with Undersecretary General Rosemary DiCarlo, that the world's grain production has been impacted directly by Russia. Do you have any reaction to Putin today telling the BRICS summit that he is a reliable partner to Africa for food and fuel supplies?
Clearly, his actions speak louder than words. He agreed during the Africa summit to provide, and I can't give you the exact figure, but you probably know, but it was somewhere around 50,000 tons of grain. That's a drop in the bucket of the need. So if he's serious, he would allow for the Black Sea Grain Initiative to continue, because that was the most effective way of getting food to the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaudens. By the way, in addition to Tanya, Catherine is with us, Katarina Beme, our former Chief of Cabinet. Now she's the ADG for External Relations. I think we will widen the Zoom so you can see who is in the room later, yeah. And I'm really glad that we have started with introduction. And I really like the one word, what you suggested as one word. Maybe I will start from there. I will repeat action, and I will tell you also which one I had in mind, because I thought Gaudens will ask me the same thing. I had it written next to me, then somebody from you had said it. So action, optimist, collaboration, relevance, promise, social participation, inclusion, change, together, community, transformation, innovation, listening to grassroots, equality, impact, and enabling. I hope these words will be our guiding ones in our work together. By the way, the word I chose, because in anticipation that I would be asked the same question, was together. So I was surprised when Thomas said that. So together, I think two, inclusion two, collaboration two, action two. I think from the words those that go to repeat are four. But I think all 16 words are very, very important. And we have to use them as our guiding principles. Then thank you so much for joining us today to launch the WHO Civil Society Commission through this inaugural first meeting of the steering committee. I thank Lisa Hilmi and Ravi Ram for agreeing to be the first co-chairs and for orchestrating the work of the steering committee, and look forward to working with the co-chairs very closely through them with you and also with all of you. This is a very important moment for WHO and for global health. Listening to the voices of individuals and communities is essential to addressing the challenges they face. We know from our experience in so many areas that listening to and responding to the voices of the communities we serve is essential to properly addressing the health challenges they face. For example, during the Ebola outbreak in the North Kivu and Ituri provinces of the Democratic Republic of the Congo from 2018 to 2020, certain burial customs presented a high risk of transmission. But simply removing bodies from families to protect them created significant community resistance and resulted in some families hiding bodies for fear they would not be able to say goodbye in the traditional way. Through careful engagement with civil society and communities, we were able to design burial practices that were both safe and dignified and acceptable to the communities. And when communities collaborated, I think we contained the Ebola in DRC. We contained it in DRC, although some models were showing that it may spread in the region and throughout the world. But because of the strong participation of communities, we managed to stop it in DRC. And this was a key step in helping to bring the outbreak under control. That is the participation of civil society, and through the civil society, participation of the communities. There are countless other examples in other disease areas. Strengthening WHO's work with civil society has been a key priority for WHO. As part of the transformation we have been making since I began as Director General in 2017. Over the past 6 years, we have transformed our strategy, our processes, our operating model, our culture, our financing, our workforce, and our approach to partnerships. These were the 7 work streams or focus areas that we had. And partnership, by the way, was one of the major pillars in our transformation. Traditionally, as you know, WHO has been shy by design, which I always say, by the way, and too risk-averse in the way we interact with non-state actors, including civil society. But we cannot achieve targets as ambitious as the Sustainable Development Goals without engaging civil society in a coordinated and organized way. That's why we have set up the WHO Civil Society Task Force for Tuberculosis, which is a success, by the way, the WHO Advisory Group of Women Living with HIV, the WHO Civil Society Working Group on Non-Communicable Diseases, and other ways to engage with civil society on specific health issues. I have also held regular dialogue with civil society on topics including long COVID, healthy aging, sexual and reproductive health, traditional medicine, climate change, sustainable financing, and more, to hear directly from them on their challenges and proposed solutions. Because civil society work with the communities, and they know the problems, they know the root cause of the problems, and you know also the solutions. We have also established a youth council and increased our engagement with the private sector while maintaining appropriate safeguards against conflict of interest. We have come a long way, but we're still at the beginning of the journey. Maybe we're still shy by design, but surely we're making progress. We recognize that we must make engagement with civil society more systematic across the 3 levels of WHO, not only with the headquarters, and establish ways to listen to the voices of the people that WHO serves. When I say 3 levels, especially the country level is very important, because that's where we get results. And today, that's why we're here. We have set up the WHO Civil Society Commission, the first of its kind, to bring civil society from different backgrounds together to advise us and work with us so that we can learn from you and be guided by your ideas and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, which are way off track. The Civil Society Commission will also provide an opportunity for civil societies to learn from each other and to make their voices heard more loudly and clearly. The Civil Society Commission is the central element of WHO's commitment to engage with civil society. And for today, I have 3 aims for this work. First, I encourage you to set the priorities, and I'm looking forward to seeing which issues and topics you identify. I'm glad listening is one of the words you chose. We should start from listening to you, and please don't hold back. Tell us what you think is the right thing to do. Second, we seek your guidance to develop the WHO civil society engagement strategy. And third, I hope to engage with you on key organizational priorities, such as the development of WHO's next 5-year plan, the 14th General Program of Work, sustainable financing, the investment round, and the pandemic accord. By the way, on assessed contribution, our member states have made a historic decision to increase our assessed contribution by 20% for 24-25, the budget year of 24-25. This is, by the way, the largest in the history of the organization. Last year, they decided 50% increase, and the 20% this year was part of the 50%. And over 7 years, we will build up to 50%. But that will be one area that we would like to work with, the investment round and the rest, because without sustainable financing, I don't think we can do, we can achieve the ambitious targets we have set for ourselves. Thank you all once again for your commitment to WHO and for improving the way we engage with civil society. I look forward to hearing your assessment on the status of WHO's engagement with civil society and your proposals and recommendations on how we can work better together for a healthier, safer, fairer world. I thank you, and Gaudes, back to you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Pedros, for those inspiring words.
This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.